Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why Everyone Plays. We're back with another Slayer since by now it's probably well established that a lot of popular champions are ones who can 1v9 games. So for today, let's talk about Zed, the Master of Shadows. When a lot of people think of the word assassin, this guy is the first to come to mind. He was always a fan favorite ever since he came out, but it wouldn't be until that infamous outplay that solidified his position as League's most iconic assassin.
Oh, look at the cleanse, look at the moves! Faker, what was that?
Now, I know many of you are about to go into the comments and say everyone plays him because they're Naruto weebs or an anime ninja, but I want to go into the actual gameplay factors that influence his loyal fanbase. Even though yes, his thematic elements do play a huge role in people wanting to pick him up, the way he was designed makes him arguably one of the most enjoyable assassins to play because he has a lot of ways to access a fight or handle situations that others may not be able to. If you watched the video on Slayers, I talked about how between the two subclasses, assassins carry a lot more risk in their playstyles as most of them lack the resilience to escape danger or survive enemy counter-engage compared to their sister class skirmishers who may not be nearly as tanky as bruisers but can still punch their way out of a bad situation if they're being engaged on. That risk is met with, of course, higher reward. Assassins carry the highest front-loaded damage in the entire game, and some of them also rank among the best in terms of combat mobility. Akali, Kassadin, Yone, and Qiyana. When played correctly, these champions can single-handedly force the enemy team into such a disadvantageous position due to their immense and more importantly, immediate pressure. And the reason they're played in the mid lane and jungle is because of positioning. Those two roles give them easy access to all around the map. Top and bot lane aren't ideal spots due to their isolated nature. Whichever assassins that aren't capable of clearing jungle camps easily are instead fielded in the mid lane. Zed, Yone, Talon, Qiyana, Akali, Fizz, Kassadin, and Katarina. As you know, assassins are all known to deal crazy amounts of burst damage, but the rest of their attributes range on a spectrum. For example, Fizz and Talon specialize in locking onto a single target and erasing them from the fight as quickly as possible. Akali and Kassadin are more combat-oriented assassins. They're able to stay in the fight a little longer and carry tools or items to keep them safe and healthy in the chaos of battle. Katarina and Qiyana are sort of the opposite of Talon and Fizz. Instead of hitting one person, they try to hit as many people as possible all at once, gambling on their ability to win the team fight off their primary engage since they don't have the same escape or survival tools that Akali and Kassadin have. Their strong team fighting is a rare trait to see from an assassin, which is sort of a plus for them. And then there's Zed, who's smack dab in the middle. Among all assassins, Zed's the most well-rounded. He's got incredible burst damage on single target, but has enough AoE coverage to score hits on multiple enemies. He mostly fights up close and personal, but also can attack safely from a distance. His mobility is amazing when both attacking and retreating, and at optimal levels he can stay in combat for a very long time thanks to his relatively short cooldowns and energy. These attributes coalesce to form an assassin who's able to handle almost any situation pretty competently. Just about every other assassin in League has some really obvious weakness. For example, let's compare Zed with Talon and Qiyana, the other two AD mid lane assassins, and look at how they are in terms of mobility. Talon's tempo far exceeds that of Zed or Qiyana, but his combat mobility is the worst of the three since all he has is Noxian Diplomacy for a gap closer, which by the way only has 575 units of range whereas other dashes are 650 plus. Mind you, if you're fighting anywhere near the jungle, you're never going to be able to catch him if he runs away, but in the heat of combat he has practically no instant reposition. He does have 2.5 seconds of invisibility thanks to Shadow Assault, but that's his ultimate and it's still not fast repositioning, it's just movement. So if he's slowed, he's not going to go anywhere. Qiyana has two dashes, Audacity and Terra Shape. The latter has a short dash range but is fast and far enough for her to sidestep attacks or get closer to a fleeing target. Brush Element Q effectively gives her a short duration Akali shot to wiggle around in, and unlike Talon, it's very spammable if she spaces them out. Even though she has the best teamfight presence of the three, the drawback is that she lacks escapes. Just like Talon's Q, Qiyana's E can only be used on targets, which usually implies an offensive chase. If she fails to win the teamfight off her initial combo, she doesn't have the ability to parkour over walls to escape. Zed, on the other hand, has 3 mobility spells, his W Shadow Swap, Deathmark, and the swap back from Deathmark Shadow. All 3 of them are also blinks, with no cast time, meaning they're instant and can't be stopped by displacement hard crowd control like Alistar's Headbutt and Pulverize, or interceptors like Poppy's Steadfast Presence and Veigar's Event Horizon. Blinks are the best form of combat mobility for these very reasons, and Zed has 3 of them. Technically, thanks to the cooldown reduction effect, he can get 4 if he lands enough hits with multiple shadows. Moreover, Living Shadow is a free targeted dash, so he can use it to either gap close or put some distance between him and pursuers. And while Deathmark can only be used aggressively on champions, it leaves behind a shadow for him to blink back to, so he can go in, deal a whole bunch of damage, and then blink out to safety. It's not just mobility that he's good with, but also damage. Razor Shuriken and Shadow Slash can come from each of his shadows, so if he positions himself and his 2 shadows in a fight, he can effectively strike 3, 4, even 5 people all at the same time. Mind you, he doesn't have the same ridiculous AoE damage that Qiyana does with her ultimate, but he still brings the pain. Alongside Kha'Zix, he's the most flexible assassin in the game because he has the best form of combat mobility as well as strong damage in single combat and team fights. But what sets him apart from other mid lane assassins is one word: neutral. I know the term neutral isn't used very often in League since you usually only hear it in 2D fighting games like Mortal Kombat or Smash Bros, but to give a brief explanation, neutral game, as the name implies, is a game state in which neither side has a situational advantage over the other. If you watch pro play, you probably have seen many instances of it, where both teams spend a lot of time going back and forth, pushing waves, trying to poke each other, not really looking to engage, mostly just feeling out what they're gonna do or waiting for them to make a mistake first. One thing about Zed that people really like is that he has an actual neutral game, that is, he doesn't need to approach if he doesn't want to. Even though League of Legends is a game that rewards proactivity, getting the first strike, so to speak, it's super easy to punish bad proactivity as well. All Slayers are melee champions, so they usually have to go in to attack, but Zed has the option to simply throw out attacks from a distance to get a feel for what his opponent is gonna do, or just to throw out some harass damage. A common mistake a lot of beginners make, especially in low elo, is that they always try to fight their opponents without putting much thought into how the opponent might also want to approach, or if they're aiming to punish yours. Without any unpredictability or situational awareness, it can be really difficult to mount an offense, especially against a better player. Champions with long-range poke have good neutral games because they can safely attack without putting themselves in danger. Assassins rarely carry that much range, and if they do, they don't travel very far. Generally speaking, attacks like Diana's Crescent Strike have too low of a range to be used safely since she's in range of enemy engage such as catchers or divers, and those that do travel farther like Echo's Timewinder are far too slow to contribute any meaningful damage. The only 2 assassins with good projectiles that are fast and do a lot of damage are Zed and Kha'Zix with evolved spike racks. Zed's combination of Living Shadow and Razor Shuriken can reach over 1500 units away, which is longer than artillery mages. Kha'Zix doesn't have the same reach, but he can fire 3 big AoE spikes that massively slow enemies' hit. There are a lot of times Zed can simply just zone off the enemy team by tossing out a WEQ to do damage, but since the shadow is still there, anywhere around it is now officially off limits for squishy champions because in a split second, he can blink to the shadow and assassinate them. Harassing opponents can be a very safe way to gain an advantage since it's really hard to put yourself in a bad spot while you're doing it. Obviously, you don't pick an assassin to do poke damage, you want to go in and explode everyone, but sometimes you'll run into unfavorable circumstances such as being first pick Zed, and the enemy team goes Shen, Gragas, Pantheon, Tristana, and Leona. That's not exactly an easy team you can go into without getting stunned for 20 years, so Zed has the option to poke them over and over again thanks to his long range, low cooldowns, and energy that always replenishes. He can make them approach. And once they do, that's where he takes control. Due to the special properties of his shadows, he has an absolutely massive amount of outplay potential. You can watch dozens of Zed montages and still not know all the different ways he can attack or evade. Assassins in general are famous for their high skill ceiling, but Zed is definitely up there next to Akali in terms of mastery difficulty. Thing is, he's also pretty easy to get into. Yes, there's a vast difference between a good and bad Zed, but if we're talking about only basic combos, Zed has a pretty easy one: W, E, and Q. None of his attacks have any special conditions the way Akali does, such as walking in and out of her circle, attacking in between stealth, timing your ults, throwing your shuriken backward then dashing forward, none of that. Each of Zed's abilities are pretty simple. Contempt for the Weak is percent health damage against half health targets. Razor Shuriken is a straight line skill shot. Living Shadow sends out a shadow that lets you swap places with it. Shadow Slash is damage around him. Deathmark blinks to a target with brief untarget ability and lets you then blink back to the shadow. Yes, there are extra properties such as the energy refund on W or the shadow cooldown reduction on E, but on paper, they're pretty digestible. This allows some legroom for prospective players by sticking to his bread and butter combos to remain useful while getting a better grasp on how to use him and his shadows to their fullest extent. Swapping between his shadows grants him the ability to dodge skill shots. Deathmark's untarget ability grants him the ability to dodge targeted attacks. In theory, Zed is capable of avoiding literally any attack in the game. Don't misunderstand, he's still considered a very hard champion in the grand scheme of things since you need a lot of game knowledge and mechanical skill to play him well. Even though Zed has all of these options, the player still needs to learn when it's safe to go in, how to actually play the neutral, which 99% of the player base doesn't. You also need to master split-second decision making, such as knowing when to blink back to your shadow, more importantly, which one since you can have up to 2, and last but not least, you need to be able to aim. Zed's Q has an extremely thin hitbox and is easy to miss, but as you progressively learn him over time, your performance can visibly improve in games. That's why there's so many hardcore Zed players, because he can be a very staple AD mid laner at all elos. The only two downsides of maining him is that he's a physical damage dealer and has absolutely no hard crowd control. Mid laners are often expected to carry the bulk of magic damage for the team, and a lot of them also have at least 1 or 2 forms of crowd control. One-tricking Zed isn't that safe, particularly because of that, since you run the risk of being in a lot of full AD team compositions. Though that's not to say you can't pull it off. Being full AD only matters if the enemy team has a lot of fighters and tanks, and if they're smart enough to actually build armor. You'd be surprised a lot of support and AD carry mains, they still go their normal build even if they're up against a full AD enemy team. This last point also may sound kinda stupid, but it's one of those subtle yet very meaningful details. Zed has a very solid and comfortable laning phase. Assassins have a tendency to be pretty bad early game because that's when they have long cooldowns, high mana costs, no items, and remember, they're all melee champions, so they can get bullied out of lane by harass. Additionally, they have terrible wave clear, or at least they can't wave clear without putting themselves in danger. Zed does have issue with those kinds of things, but not to the same extent as Talon, Katarina, and such. As I mentioned, he's got good AoE damage, so he pushes waves relatively fast. Long range, so if he's in a losing matchup, he can just last hit with Qs and wait for an opportunity to open up, unlike everyone else who incessantly bleeds out and has like 30 CS by 10 minutes. His passive allows his auto attacks to do bonus damage to low health targets, making CSing under tower that much easier. Last and most importantly, he operates on energy, not mana, so he doesn't need to worry about resource management. He can stay for as long as he wants to until he's either super low on health or sitting on like 2000 gold. Essentially, he's an assassin who doesn't have to go all in, and while that sort of goes against the essential experience of a high risk, high reward champion, it's nice to be able to stay in the game even if you had a rough start or got counterpicked. There's always those moments where the assassin feels completely useless because the enemy team has too many shields or tanks, which makes going in practically suicidal. All of these are tiny things that make him have a much smoother laning phase and overall a smoother everything. Self-sufficient, scales pretty dang well too. He doesn't really fall off unless the enemy team is a full-on 5v5 front-to-back comp. Then he might struggle a bit. I'm not necessarily saying Zed is the best assassin in the game. I don't think there really is the best assassin since each one does their own things. He doesn't have the same 1v9 reset potential that Katarina or Kha'Zix has, and there's a lot more ways he can mess up compared to Talon, who can burst the enemy carry more reliably. But this isn't a video on why he's the best, this is just a video on why everyone plays him. And yes, even though I said I wouldn't talk about it specifically, people do play Zed because he's an edgy ninja. It's the same reason they play Yasuo and Yone. That, and of course the Faker outplay and all the montages. He's cool, he's definitely really cool to play and watch. When you can dash in from a full screen away, one-shot someone, or dash around everywhere with your shadows and blink right back out, it's pretty satisfying to pull off. But contrary to just the culture surrounding him, I think people gravitate towards him the most because of his gameplay, even if they may not consciously think about it. So, if you enjoyed, a rating would be much appreciated, and don't forget to sub to the channel for more content like this. Consider following me on my socials and join my Discord server if you'd like. Also, if you have some extra time, why not take a look at my other Why Everyone Plays videos if you haven't seen them yet. But for now, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.